Hey everybody, so we are still on our mission to basically add validation in the scenes to limit density, fog density to positive floating point numbers. And that's kind of been the theme for the last 3 or 4 days. Basically, the idea is the issue is that like these are very, very like so much more complicated than they should be, but or that they seem like they would be, but they are. Um, and I think it's just because like most people, or at least in my personal experience, every time I've ever been thrust into dealing with validation on forums and things like that, I've never really got to architect or build that on my own. What has ended up happening was that some other fully mature system was put in place and it was extremely difficult to deal with. I definitely had more colorful language for it at the time. But so now this is kind of like the first time where I'm just sort of building it out, and I want to build it out in an enterprise friendly way. And I want to kind of understand why the sort of the architects and people like that made these incredibly difficult and fragile systems, why they did that. Um, and so yeah, so that's what's happening. And so we're moving through this at a snail's pace. And at the same time, I'm trying to make my videos shorter because I think people like that better. But at the same time, I'm trying to sort of parse out every little piece of what the heck is going on and why things are weird. And I definitely want to start in sort of the most just hey easiest to understand this works, and then slowly sort of develop it into a more complex structure, and then hopefully that more complex structure is just easy to implement new validations for. And that's the overall goal, at the same time. So as I was kind of thinking through this, like most validation things I've ever worked in, people just couldn't explain very well. And that's just, I think, because, it's just a general phenomenon of anytime you work on something that's technical, whether it be like cars or anything, it tends to be more, it tends to be difficult to transform the actual behaviors into human language once the behavior gets beyond a certain level of complexity. And I think the validators and all that are probably a really good example of it. And then I was thinking that like I think the majority of people that watch these videos aren't English speakers. So I was thinking, man, I bet you most programming is in English, so like array is an English word, float is an English word, integer. These are all English words. And so then if somebody's speaking a different language, they literally, in their verbal day to day language, while interacting with other human beings, they're literally writing a programming language in a different human language. Man, that's a mind bender. But anyways, so that's where we're at. And so there's four general steps, and then one is to build a custom validator. And my take on that is that a custom validator is something that will analyze the entire string, or really string, the entire character set that you're providing it, and determine whether if it's good or not good. So that's what a custom validator does. And then you have your form group, uh, and that is just a way of communicating to the form uh, one or more custom validators that you want. So now the form can determine if the form as a whole and the individual control are valid or invalid. And then we have our restricting the input. So this is basically disabling individual keystrokes. So this is sort of validation adjacent. This is more like preventing the user from entering something. And sometimes this is the best way and can be used exclusively. and sometimes it's just an awful way, and is very confusing to the user, and um, can be just a nightmare for the user. So like sometimes it's the best thing and sometimes it's the worst thing, and that's kind of how life goes. And then here's a key: the this to basically it's a function that is called anytime the user key presses a key and determines. And then you'll notice, and this is something I really didn't notice before, but the validation, and in this case they chose to use a regular expression, the regular expression for what characters are allowed, and the regular expression for which what is valid for the entire uh, character set is unique and is different. And I honestly had never really processed that before, and those sort of two concepts would just sort of get mixed together for me. And it's true, like the only characters that you should be able to enter in this specific scenario is a decimal point and a number. And really, you should only be able to enter one decimal point. And we could have coded that into this function. But um, when taken as a whole, um, that those same rules apply, right? So you could actually prevent somebody from even entering a bad float number. But as I was mentioning yesterday, in like the example of typing in a password, they can type in characters that make it invalid. And that is a variance that, you kind of have to think through. So anyways, I think in this specific example, we wouldn't have to do this. We could easily avoid doing a validation and just only do key press restriction, input restriction. We could just do 3 and 4 and just add just a little bit more logic to this to just ensure that there's only one decimal point. And then also ensure that they can't put a negative in there. But I think it makes more sense to do it all for the learning, for the learning, and then the way we'll be able to test it is by adding a second decimal point. So basically, we won't restrict it so that when they add the second decimal point, it doesn't. And so this is all in the future. This is definitely not going to all happen in today's video, but we did get our validation in here, and we got this fog density validation. So now one part of this is, and they sort of mix these two together, right? Restrict the input, and then they just sort of slide this in, which I don't think has anything to do with this keyboard instruction. So basically this code here, this markup, it mixes these two concepts together, which is confusing. Basically, this is always just watching the form to see if there's an error and if that error is the invalid float. And up here is where we set invalid float. So we can create any kind of error we want at this point. We could have been like blah, 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 and that would have been fine. And if blah, blah, blah is true, then there's a blah, blah, blah error. And if blah, blah, blah is false, there's not a blah, blah, blah error. And then down here is where it's checked. And I think that is confusing. And so did we change? I guess the question is like, did we change this? Is it still invalid float, or did we change it? I think we changed it. So let's go to the definition and let's look. Oh, so it's still invalid float. And I feel like we should make it invalid positive float because there will probably be in the future, there probably will be an invalid float as well. And obviously in the future, like these lines of code here will exist. All of this will exist, but it's going to be stored and served and provided in a very different way. So I'm just going to save. So it shouldn't break anything because we're not even trying to do this. So now we want to add, now we're going to jump. So we're at 1 and we built out our function, and 2 when we pass it in. And now number 3, it says that we're trying to restrict the input, but then we just kind of slid in this set of code that monitors. It's telling the template to monitor the form and get the control for input, and then show this error if that input in that. So there's a lot of moving parts here, right? We're looking for this, which is tied to this on the form, which is tied to this in the form group on the TypeScript. So there's 3 things there that you kind of have to get kind of set in your brain. And then we're looking to see if it's this error. Okay, so it could have a different error, but if it's this error, invalid float, which we just changed to invalid positive float, and that's tied to this up here. So like if you're a very visual, I'm a super visual person, so like literally, like if I'm reading a book, a fiction book, I'm imagining every single thing that's written down. And so it can be a real disaster for me if in a fictional book somebody's walking around and he's a character, he's the main character, and we're talking about him all the time, and then they mention his red hair. Because like literally I have tens of thousands of pictures that have to be redrawn in my head to accommodate this guy's red hair, because I used to think he had blonde hair or black hair or gray hair, right? So in my mind, like I'm picturing how all these pieces fit together, and this is a bizarre set of boxes that are connected together, because we have this up here, this invalid float, which, you know, we just totally ignore that here, and then suddenly it's here. But this says that it's about restricting the input when it wasn't. It was actually, this part of this is actually tied to this up here. So, you know, it's a crazy little sort of collection of things. So basically I want to do this sort of equivalent thing. Now my form name is not the same, right? So if we go, I think I can hit Alt and left. Yeah, and we'll go back. The form controls name is actually fog density, not number input. And then the error that we're looking for is actually invalid positive float, not invalid float. So now we need to find that section. And that is this section here for fog density. And then we have this other thing to deal with, which is that we're doing angular material here. So I don't even know if that's going to affect anything. I'm sure it will. It's almost like, I guess what we want is another, I wonder, I guess, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to do about that. But so let's just move forward and just go with this. Let's copy this line of code and just put it here. And I don't know. I'm sure in Angular material we're going to have to search back around and then it looks like this is the old way. So what we want is @if, and it looks like it's lowercase. @if, and then it looks like we want to maybe like that. Oh wait, no, we're completely off the reservation here. What we want is to go @if, and it looks like it's just a warning, but let's just see what it says. Oh, okay, yeah, so no, it's not, it's more than a warning. @if, and then we want to put curly brackets in there. And then we want to, this is what we want to evaluate on. And then we want to get rid of this completely. And we want to move this in here. And then we want to change the name of this to exp to, I think it's, oh, fog density, because that's the name of the input. And we want to show that if it's invalid positive float. And who the heck knows if this is going to work. Okay, so it looks like that compiled. So go to our center, and we're going to change our fog to experience. And then, yay. All right. So that's good. Obviously, it's not correct. I mean, it works. It works, and you got to be happy with that. Obviously, not done in the Angular material way. So like this is a tough task. Like what the path that we have chosen to go down here is not easy, and there's a lot of moving parts, and it's pretty easy to screw up. And like this is a very relaxed situation, right? Like there's no deadlines, there's no team you're going to let down by not getting it done. There's no manager that's going to have a hard description. There's no like demo day that's going to come and go when you were supposed to demo this. We're just like having fun coding this, and it's super important to make sure that that we don't let this get too out of hand and too stressful. And so I think the next step is going to be to figure out, okay, so what are we supposed to do in Angular material about these? They thought about that. There's a lot of things. Well, really not. There are edge cases that the Angular material people miss. This is clearly not going to be one of those edge cases. They have clearly thought through how you show errors in a form. And so that's next. Let's see, where are we at time? 17 minutes. Okay, so I'm under 20. That's the new standard that I'm trying to stay under in hopes of getting a like from my one buddy out there. I know, I see you. I'm watching you. I know I'm like 3 days late. So like whatever you do, I'll respond to in 3 days. But happy coding, everybody, and bye.